Tonight we began the book of Ruth, a fascinating book, and we had a really interesting class. Join, watch, find out. Okay, so we're going to start with chapter 1. Now, again, the book of Ruth is not very long. It has, I believe, 4 chapters. So it's not very long. It's a fascinating story, which, like most biblical stories, is generally grossly misunderstood. I don't think anyone ever made a movie about it, but I could imagine Hollywood liking the script. And I could sort of cringe a little at what I think their interpretation of the script would be. Just try to understand it as it's explained in the classical sources, as the Gemara, as the Talmud looks at it. And again, any questions? There's a lot of themes that are definitely things you're going to question. So feel free. I don't think anyone here is shy. The book opens up, chapter 1, verse 1. Vayihi b'yemei shofet hashoftim. It was in the times when the judges judged. That's definitely a very questionable phrase that we will talk about after I finish going through a few psukim. And there was a hunger. There was a very, very intense hunger that actually lasted for many years. Something happened that we know of happened before, and hopefully never happened since. A man from Beis Lechem, which Beis Lechem was the most honorable city of the most honorable of the 12 tribes. Beis Lechem was like the capital city, if you will, of the tribe of Yehuda, of the tribe of Judah. So the most honorable tribe, the most honorable city, and one of the most honorable inhabitants, a very important, as we say, chashava, a very important person, very wealthy, very illustrious lineage, very respected person, leader of the community. He leaves. There's a famine, and he says, I'm out of here. Because if I stay here during the famine, all of my wealth is going to be consumed. Because everyone's going to need money from me. Everyone's going to need food. Everyone's going to need resources. I can't handle that. I'll lose everything. I'll become poor. And he literally abandoned his brethren and left. Crazy. Shocking. Not only was that crazy, but where did he go to? So he goes to live in the fields of Moab. This was another crazy shock that devastated, that mortified, that horrified all the Jews that were left behind. He went to the enemy. Moab, traditionally, and again, if you're familiar with any of the Nevi'im, the prophet, were the enemy, were people that oppressed the Jews when they had the opportunity, people that conquered the land, people that harmed us for years, a very horrific, evil nation. If you know the biblical roots, Moab, actually the word means may of. That's the etymology, from the father, because Maya was descendant of Lot and his eldest daughter, who had no shame of what happened to the degree that she called herself Moab, may of, from her father. So imagine the people that come from that. These evil people, these people that hated us and that harmed us, the ultimate enemy, well, God made no famine in their land. Deliberate. This was all very strange, very weird, like, facts stranger than fiction, and very deliberate design. A horrific famine in the land of Israel and no famine in Moab. And this man, whose name we're now going to hear, Elimelech, picks up and goes. And since he's going, his family comes with. His wife, Naomi, a very, very, very righteous woman who obviously felt horrible, but what she's supposed to do, stay behind. And their 2 sons. And they live in Moab. They had 2 sons, Machlon and Chilion. And they were Ephrasim, meaning very noble people. As I said, very wealthy, very good lineage, very respected, most honorable people from the most honorable tribe in the most honorable city, that just abandoned everything and jumped ship. If you can imagine, people are into the story of the Titanic. Now, of course, the captain did not. But imagine if the captain just sort of jumped onto one of those lifeboats and left 1,500 people to die besides himself, was how the people were feeling when Elimelech picks up to save his money and leaves. They come to Moab and they're there. And what happens? Well, the next verse tells us Elimelech dies. This was divine retribution for what he did. And there's Naomi with her 2 sons. At that point, understanding the storyline until now, what would you think would happen? What should have happened? What should they have done?
Go back.
Go back home. This is, though, a very patriarchal family, as all families were. This is what the father decided. This is what we're doing. But he's gone, and very obviously he suddenly passed away. It wasn't that the Moabites killed him. The Moabites liked him. He was a Jew with a lot of money. It was just suddenly he died. Hand to God. Machlon and Chilion and Naomi should have gone back home, but they don't. Again, as we would understand the story, we would assume that Naomi probably would have wanted to, but again, here, the sons are taking the reins and they're saying, no, there's still a famine. We can't go back. The same reason our father left, we can't go back. Well, what are you going to do? You're 2 young men. And then, again, the story gets crazier. They marry. I mean, they're men. They're single. They're very eligible bachelors. They have a lot of money. They marry Moabite princesses. One's woman was named Arpa, and one was named Ruth. It seems from the commentators that Arpa, definitely Ruth, was not her original name. It was a name she was given after she got married. Now, before we even continue here, there's this huge question. I mean, there's a lot of questions going on here, but this one's so in your face. What do you think would be the most obvious thing you got to stop and talk about?
The married chick says, what the heck?
Exactly. Exactly. What's going on? You know, said, piggybacking on our previous conversation, you know, talking about going to college and not eating kosher. Here you are in the land of Moab, in the land of the enemy, marrying these 2 shiksas, marrying these 2 Moabite princesses. So obviously the question would be, is that really what happened? What could be the only redeeming grace? What might have happened, but is very not clear from the verse?
That they converted.
That they converted. That is the question. And it's a very interesting discussion on this point. Did Ruth and Arpa convert before marriage, or did they not? Again, they start off as these young princesses. They married for about 10 years and whatever the story, but we're stopping right here. I just want to focus on this issue and then we'll continue the story. And the truth is, if you look in the Talmud, if you look in the early commentators, it's not so clear. So it says, Rabbi Meir says in the Medrash, they did not convert. Lo girum, lo hitbilosam. They didn't convert them. They didn't go to mikvah. These are Moabites, and they stayed Moabites. Now, if you know the story, because I'm sure many of you do know the story, what would seem to support that perspective of Rabbi Meir that's quoted in the Medrash that they never converted? What happens shortly after? If you don't know the story, again, you're off the hook. I didn't say it yet, but assuming many of you might know the story, what happens, which would only make sense if they're not Jewish?
Well, the 2 sons died, or the
2 sons died, which you could say would be a consequence, or you could go back to the original consequence for them, like their father, abandoning their flock and living in the land of the enemy. But then what happens?
So they're impoverished. They lost their money.
They become poor. Naomi says she's going back. And what do Ruth and Orpah say?
We'll go with you. Your people
we'll
are my people.
And what does Naomi say?
No, stay here. You're princesses.
Exactly. Don't come with me. You're princesses. You can come with me. I'm old. I don't have any more sons, and I'm too old to produce anymore. And I'm poor. I don't have any money for you. We lost all our money. I lost my husband. I lost my son. I lost my other son. And I lost all of my money. I have nothing for you. Go back home. Your father, he's the king. He'll find you another good husband. That line seemingly only makes sense if what? If they are.
If they're really princesses.
Well, they were princesses. That's not our question. Okay. But if they were not Jewish, why does that whole thing Naomi's telling them make no sense if they were Jewish? What is she telling them to do?
Go back to their not Jewish lifestyles.
Yeah. Go back to Sarah. Go back to idolatry. Go back to being a non-Jew. Once someone converts, there's no going back. Of course, we know that's actually why it says, and of course we all know this, that we're so cautious about the idea of conversion. Because once you convert, you're Jewish. All of your transgressions are on all of our shoulders, you know? All the Jewish people are in it together, and any extra Jew who's sinning harms all of us. So unless we know the convert is so sincere and really means it, we don't want to convert. So if these 2 women converted before marrying, What in the world is Naomi doing? She's sending them back to idolatry? She's sending them back to a Jew that are 100% Jewish if they converted, and now they're supposed to live like a non-Jew again? I mean, that's horrific. Naomi's a very holy woman. What is she doing here? On the other hand, we're told in the Gemara, in the Talmud, that the conversation that Naomi has with Ruth, who's arguing and saying, no, I'm going with you. I'm not leaving you. You know, your people are my people. All those classical lines. Actually, that's the source for the laws of conversion. That the Chachamim, the sages of the Talmud, view what Naomi was saying to Ruth was like a process of gear, a process of going through what one would need to commit to convert. So Reb Meir says they never converted. The Gemara says the conversation Naomi had with Ruth is the basis for our understanding of the laws of conversion. And if they had converted, what Naomi was doing makes absolutely zero sense. Because how could you take Jewish girls and tell them to go live as Moabites? All of that supports somehow these men fell so low after their father died. Maybe their father would not have left. And obviously their mother doesn't have a very strong voice here, because if she had her way, they would never have left. They would have definitely gone back. They fell so low, they married Goyim. And look, God punished them. They died. But it's not so simple as that. If you continue the story, and again, I don't know how much you know the story. I'm sure you all know some of the story. I don't know anyone else here, maybe more or less. The more you know the story, to accept that Ruth had never converted, or only converted at this point when she went with Naomi to Israel, also makes no sense. So to think they're Jews makes no sense, because how could Naomi tell them to go back home? But if they had not converted, if they truly were living for those 10 years with Machlon and Chilion as shiksas, as non-Jewish wives, the rest of the story makes no sense. Anyone know anything of the rest of the story that you don't understand why I'm saying it makes absolutely no sense?
Well, just to clarify, they were married for 10 years and there were no children?
Yes.
For either sons?
Yes.
Okay.
Part of the punishment. Or say part of the punishment at the same time as we'll understand, it was part of the plot of God.
Right.
There's a lot of God's plots here. God was pulling a lot of strings. And just like the story of Esther, which of course is the most common thing to compare Ruth and Esther to, where we have these women, the heroines, where when you read it, so much makes no sense. What is God doing? And then you're like, oh, that's what God was doing. So also in Ruth, what was God doing? What are these people doing? Oh, so on one hand, obviously it was a punishment. On the other hand, it's very much propelling the plot forward. Eliza.
So okay, I'm skipping ahead.
Yeah,
So
I'm saying skip ahead.
Sorry,
Share with me your knowledge to know why it makes no sense to say these women were non-Jews.
But if there was a mitzvah of Yivum, then there could be no mitzvah of Yivum as far as Ruth was concerned. And I thought that was what Boaz was actually deciding. That yes, there was a mitzvah of Yivum. So if there was a mitzvah, then there had to have been Geiros prior to the marriage, and it had to have been nothing contingent upon her marrying one of Naomi's sons, because then that would have nullified the Geiros anyway. You can't.
Okay, wait, now you're really jumping ahead. You went from A to like A plus 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 plus. So we're going to stop here because I don't want to confuse anyone. Stop, hold that thought. It's a very critical thought, but wait. First, I want to go to what Eliza said.
Okay, can I tuck in a question though?
No, hold it, because I want to finish this. I don't want to confuse anyone. Write it down if you're going to forget it, and then ask me a question as soon as I make this confusion clear. Let's backtrack. Someone just jumped on. We are wondering, Machlon and Chilion, according to the verse, the two sons of Elimelech that are now in the land of Moab, married two Moabites. Two Moabite princesses. Did they convert them? Were they living as Jews? Were they not? We said on one hand, in the Midrash, Reb Meir says they were not converted. The Talmud says the discussion between Naomi and Ruth, when Ruth is saying I'm going and Naomi says don't, is the basis for the laws of conversion. And if Ruth and Orpah were converted, how in the world is Naomi telling them go back home to idolatry? All of those facts very strongly support they were not converted. On the other hand, as Eliza said, if they were not Jewish for those 10 years of marriage, the rest of the story makes no sense. Because the story, or as I said, what's propelling the plot forward, what's moving this story to its amazing conclusion, only scripted by God himself. This is, again, one of those things that, like, oh my gosh, how everything comes together in the most beautiful, unbelievable, holy hand of God, is that there was a need here for Yibum. Now, we will discuss at length Yibum when we get to it. So if you're not exactly sure what it is, fear not. But basically what it is, just to understand the point we're going to make, is Yibum is a situation where a couple is married, do not have children. There is a nowadays only living brother meaning alive during the same time as the deceased man, who biblically could marry the widow, and they would have a child that would continue spiritually the dead man. Nowadays, we don't do Yibum at all. The Torah gives two options, Yibum or Chalitza. Chalitza is a ceremony. The CRC has such a booth that you need, and it's written exactly in the Torah, exactly how we do it, where we disconnect the ties between this widow and her deceased husband's brother. Ideally, in an ideal world where we felt people were marrying for the right reasons, Yibum is far preferred to Chalitza. Obviously, if either the man or woman don't want to get married, Chalitza is a viable option. But if they agree to get married, it's considered a very beautiful thing to continue the deceased man through the child. Ashkenazim stopped Yibum a long time ago. Sephardim stopped Yibum in the beginning of the 1900s. Exile was easier in the Sephardic lands, and that's why they could maintain it on a purer level for much longer. Nobody nowadays does Yibum. In the times of the story, which was during the 350-year era of the judges, and we didn't get to, but we may get to today discussing that era as well, which I definitely want to touch on. Obviously, Yibum is the desired option. And this whole story of Ruth is discussing the concept of the Yibum for the sake of Machlon, her dead husband, and who should do the Yibum, and Yibum yes, Yibum no, Yibum yes, Yibum no. Wait a minute. If Ruth isn't Jewish, that was not a marriage. If that was not a marriage, there's no Yibum. So the whole concept of Yibum, which figures so centrally in the book of Ruth, only makes sense if Ruth was Jewish when she was married to Machlon. Additionally, throughout the whole book of Ruth, we keep referring to Naomi as Ruth's mother-in-law. Again, if Ruth wasn't Jewish, this lady's not her mother-in-law. If a non-Jew is married to a Jew, that's not a marriage. They're not married. They're not spouses. They don't have mother-in-laws or nothing. From a Jewish perspective, this is a zero or less than a zero. So there's definitely no mother-in-law issue. Even if you would say, well, but at this point, Ruth converts. So that's beautiful. She's a wonderful, holy convert. But she's not Naomi's daughter-in-law. Because to be Naomi's daughter-in-law, she has to be married to her son. And if she was non-Jewish for those 10 years, that's no marriage. So she's no daughter-in-law. She's a wonderful woman, but she's no daughter-in-law. So lots of these details. We speak of Boaz as the redeemer of Ruth's property. Again, Ruth's property, if she was never, according to a Jewish perspective, married, she has no rights to Machlon's property, so there's no redeemer of the property. So we see very clearly from the book itself, makes no sense she was Jewish, makes no sense she was not Jewish. So how do we understand it? So the Zohar has an interesting explanation, which Eliza somehow was going in that direction very impressively. And I'm just going to give the whole answer instead of like walking you through it, but just the understanding of this whole issue. Zohar says, no way were they not converted. No way would Machlon and Chilion have married, as Yael said, says, non-Jewish women. I mean, no, they didn't fall that. But the conversion was not as we would want a conversion to be. Obviously not. Here you have two Moabite princesses having what we would call an arranged marriage, a marriage of state, as happened for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years in all the noble families throughout the world. So when Eglon, the king, is marrying his two daughters, two of his probably many daughters, to these two Jewish men, he's marrying them for political reasons, to enmesh them more in the Moabite culture, to make them truly Moabites and make their money truly Moabite money. It wasn't like these girls had any say in the matter. It wasn't like these men met these girls somewhere and they decided they... Nothing like that was going on. It was an arranged marriage. And in the non-Jewish world, in those days, in arranged marriage, the girls had zero say in the story. So here, let's imagine what happened. Here you have these two Jewish men, obviously having very much fallen from where they should be holding, but still, they're only going to marry Jewish women. So when this marriage is proposed, they probably said, yeah, we'll marry this woman as long as what? What do you think was the condition Machlon and Chilion made with the king of Moab?
As long as they convert.
Exactly. And we're only going to marry Jews, but if they convert, yeah, we'd love to marry your daughters and love to stay in this country. We love it. It's great. There's rain. Our money we think is secure. There's a great place. No problem. They tell the girls, you're converting. Okay. So did Ruth and Arpa convert? Absolutely. Was it a conversion as we want a conversion to be? Absolutely not. Does that mean for the 10 years they were married, they were not keeping Shabbos? They were worshiping idols in their backyard. They were, sneaking in shrimp. No, we doubt that totally. They were obedient wives and they were following the cultures and mores and religion of their husbands. So for 10 years, they lived as religious Jews. Of course, everyone was a religious, and there's no such thing. I'm using the word religious, that we would use it. I mean, what we call Jewish. They lived as Jews for 10 years. 100% they lived as Jews in the land of Moab for 10 years. But were they really Jewish or not? They converted. They lived as Jews. But Reb Meir say they didn't convert. Well, they converted. Why say they didn't convert? Is that a conversion? He's saying, is that a conversion? But then again, if it wasn't considered a conversion, what are we discussing Yibum for, mother-in-law for, any of that other stuff? Because when you have a convert and you're not sure if the conversion is valid or not, you need to see the convert's sincerity. You need to see, are they doing this for real or are they doing this for marriage? Now, obviously, that question happens many times today. It's an ancient question. That's a very current question. And I'm sure many of you might know people with those types of situations. Maybe someone who was involved with a Jewish man or a Jewish woman and converted. And the question was, well, was it sincere or was it not? How do you know? Sometimes you only know after like 5, 10, 20 years. So the girls converted, but they converted because they were told to convert. They didn't have a searching for Judaism, an aha moment. They didn't search out these Jewish men because Judaism. It's very fair to assume that the first Jews they ever met were their husbands. Jews weren't hanging out in Moab. Moab was the land of the enemies. They weren't aware of the culture. They weren't aware of the religion. They weren't aware of God. Anything. They were raised in an idolatrous home, and they were told, convert. Here are the laws. They kept the laws. How do we know if their conversion was sincere? They kept the laws for 10 years. So what? We don't know if their conversion was sincere because they kept the laws for 10 years. Again, thinking of those times, this is what your husband says to do. This is what you do. That doesn't show any sincerity in your conversion. So how will we ever know if they're sincere? Good question. But once their husbands die and all their money is gone, now we can find out, have they been Jewish for the last 10 years or have they not been Jewish for the last? So when they are saying to Naomi, we want to go with you, both of them said that. Ruth and Orpah said it. Naomi's like, okay, now's the moment. Now we need to know. It might be painful for her to find out that our sons were married to non-Jews all these years, but now we got to know. Are they real or not? And if they're sincere, and I'm telling them every reason in the book why they shouldn't come with me, and they still come with me, that means retroactively, 10 years ago, they were sincere converts. And if I convince them that they shouldn't come with me, that means retroactively, 10 years ago, they were insincere converts, and they haven't been Jewish for these past years. This is akin to, as I'm sure many of you have heard of the concept, if a child, a non-Jewish child, is adopted, or as sometimes happens, a non-Jewish woman converts sincerely and she already has children with her Jewish husband, and those young children are converted as well. Is it a real conversion? Are they Jewish or not? And we're told, wait till the bar bas mitzvah, where they are supposed to be told, you have a choice. And if you choose, then you want Judaism, you were Jewish the whole time. You don't want Judaism, you were never Jewish. Very similar concept. Or you might not be aware of, but let's extend that further. Let's say there was a child who never knew that they were converted as a baby or a very young child. I'm very familiar with a case. Exactly the case. A Jewish man married to a not Jewish woman, had 2 children, and then the man became close to his Jewish roots. And his wife also very sincerely wanted Judaism. And she converted totally according to Jewish law. And they converted the 2 young children. But they never told the children that. The children were raised not knowing that. They knew their mother was a convert, but they never knew that it was after they were born. And on the day they accidentally found out, They have a choice. Doesn't make difference how old they are. They could be 15, they could be 55. On the day you find out, you have a choice. Are you Jewish or not? You have till sunset that day to make the decision. If you do not reject Judaism until sunset of that day, you are always Jewish. If you reject it, you were never Jewish. If 2 days later you decide you want to reject it, it's irrelevant. It's like any Jew saying that. If you're not Jewish, you rejected it that day, that moment. So very similar. These situations that you might be familiar with are very similar to the concept here. Dina, what's your question?
So I wasn't aware that retroactively it makes you Jewish all that time. Does that mean that like all your mitzvahs and everything, like, I guess, did it mean anything when you did them? If you just say, no, forget it, like in this example, I'm not going to be Jewish. And then what happened to all their mitzvahs and all their prayers and like everything that you did, they did thinking they're a Jew?
Great question. I guess I was not clear enough to express it. It's not that retroactively they're changing their spiritual status. It's that we don't know what their spiritual status really is. That moment of decision, like for these women, when the phrase is the fear of their husband was on them when they converted. For their husband's sake, they converted, but converted, as we would call it, Orthodox. It's not that their decision 10 years later now retroactively changes their status. It's we find out the truth of their conversion. So when 10 years later, Ruth is sticking to her Judaism, that's telling us, how do we know? We're humans. That 10 years before when she converted, there was sincerity there. Even though it was an arranged marriage, even though she knew almost nothing, whatever she was taught that she needed to know to convert, grabbed her and she converted for Ruth.
Does it affect the
Arka,
child?
who looked the same for these 10 years, I mean, basically the same thing, exactly, but basically was following the rules the same way. When she converted 10 years before, she was only converted because she had to. It was part of this marriage. And therefore, she never had sincerity. And 10 years later, she still didn't have sincerity because she never was Jewish. So it's not like at that point, retroactively, we're changing from Jew to non-Jew or non-Jew to Jew. No, it was always that way. But now it's expressed that we as humans can say, oh, that's what's going on. Elisa, who had a question for a very long time.
Thank you. So I've always wondered, where was the mikvah? Because Moab is not a place we know in terms of where Moab was. We know the topography. It's not like it's a place of natural springs. You can't exactly open your eyes under Yam HaMelech, and that would be just incredibly painful. Where was there a mikvah for the girls to have gone?
Any natural body of water would have been a mikvah. Any lake, any river, anything.
Oh, are there lakes there?
There must be, because I don't think they built one then, though that's also possible, but that would have been a lot harder. I'm assuming there must have been. I don't think they went to the ocean, traversing the land of Israel to take, I'm sure there was. I'm sure there was.
And then if there really was, then why would Machlon have, granted, we know what the story had to be, that she had to be able to be redeemed by Boaz, but it would seem to me that Kilion, of course, is going to be Nifter. But Machlon, it would seem there should be like some other option.
No, because for both of the men, they don't know. Again, it's not like a love story between these two men and these two girls. And no, it was an arranged marriage. So Machlon, who merited to be the husband of Ruth, had no more awareness than Chilion. Again, Machlon like Mechila, forgiveness, and Chilion like Kilion, destruction.
Right.
One didn't know more than the other, but we don't have to go to that point and saying that was their transgression. They converted them. They were eating kosher. They were keeping Shabbos. What was your transgression? Staying in Moab for those 10 years, not going back home to their brethren. In other words, the same reason their father died, they died. Not for marrying these not Jewish women. They converted them. They were kosher. They were doing right. Nice girls. But staying in the land of Moab, that was the reason for their death. Dina, what was your question?
A quick question. Thanks for the explanation. Before, if a convert is not sincere and did it like you were saying under the fear of her husband, then does it affect their their children's neshama?
If a convert is not sincere, then the children are not Jewish.
Oh, so
There's no neshama. It's a non-Jew.
oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so then the child, like, would a child know that until?
So you're saying nowadays, not then. You're
Yeah.
saying nowadays, if someone converted through a kosher based-in,
Mm-hmm.
through the CRC, and they fooled them, and they were insincere the whole time, but they fooled them. That's a
Yeah.
very interesting question. How we would look at it, again, is they were sincere at that moment, because there's no way, like Hashem would have protected the based-in from converting someone, and then and that was really a fake out. Now it could be that, let me phrase it to you a different way. I know someone asked me this question. Let's say someone converts, and they're all into Judaism and kosher, and their kids are going to Jewish schools and all that stuff, and then they leave it, and they raise their kids not from, and they're not from. What's going on? It's a Jew that's not keeping Torah mitzvahs. If at that moment they were sincere, there was a kosher based-in, there were 3 rabbis that truly put them through everything, and the based-in is very careful on converts, and they really, really felt they were sincere, and they went through the whole process. They were sincere. They changed their mind a month later. Guess what? When you become Jewish, you also acquire an evil inclination. So we would never view it, if someone went through a true conversion, through a true beit-in, we would assume they were sincere, but like every Jew, they could fall. We all can fall. We all do fall sometimes, but that doesn't take away our Judaism. So if a convert's sincere and falls and says, I didn't mean it, it was a farce, go back to another religion, doesn't make a difference. It's a Jew that's messing up. And then their children are 100% Jewish because it's a Jew. But prior, to this delineated by Jewish law situation, so maybe a little more of a loose situation where, like we're saying here, what was the baiting going on here? There wasn't any. Here, it definitely sounds like an insincere conversion, but maybe it was sincere. How do we know? This is how we know. This was the test. So again, putting the pieces together, saying they never converted, we understand as there was no sincere, true conversion as we could have seen. The Megillah, speaking about Yibum, speaking about Naomi as a mother-in-law, is because actually Ruth had converted sincerely. When was this discovered? When did this come to light? When she passes the test that Naomi devised, and Orpah failed the test that Naomi devised, because I know you have no sons from me. I know I'm going to be poor. I know I can go back home and be a princess. I know my father will get me another husband. I could have a child. And guess what? I'm sticking with you anyway. I'm a Jew. That shows us that 10 years before, it was a real conversion. And Orpah, convinced by Naomi's logic. If you're convinced by logic, you were never Jewish in the first place. All right. Well, we'll just quickly take these questions, and then we will stop at this point, and next week we will continue. Aliza.
Wait a minute there. Okay. So when a ger or geras becomes a Jew, and they go through geras, they acquire a new neshama with a yetzer, meaning both a yetzer tov and a yetzer hara, all at once.
When a person emerges from the mikvah, they are newly born. They're a new person. This is their birthday. If a brother and sister both converted to Judaism, they have no sibling relationship with each other anymore.
Right.
Like two new Jews.
That part I get. But what I never got.
They acquire a neshama, and so to understand it, let me explain to you the difference between a non-Jew and a Jew. Right. A Jew has a godly soul and a Jewish animal soul and an evil inclination, a yetzer hara. Those are the 3 things every Jew has. A non-Jew does not have a godly soul and does not have an evil inclination. A non-Jew has an animal soul. But the animal soul of a non-Jew is not the animal soul of a Jew. It's a different spiritual material. Kabbalistically, it's from what we call klipas tameus. It cannot allow the godliness inside of it to shine. The animal soul of a Jew is from what we call Kabbalistically klipas noiga, where the godliness shines through. So again, Jew, godly soul, Jewish animal soul, evil inclination. Non-Jew, no godly soul, no evil inclination, and non-Jewish animal soul. The non-Jew goes into that mikvah after spending maybe years studying and living and wanting to be a Jew. When the non-Jew emerges from that mikvah, the non-Jewish animal soul is gone. They emerge with a Jewish soul, with a Jewish animal soul, and with an evil inclination. They are a newborn person. This is their day of birth. As they emerge from the mikvah, envision the fetus emerging from the womb. They are coming out a new person, a Jew. And if they decide the next day to throw it all in the garbage, they're a Jew that's leaving God.
And then the non-Jew has the animal soul from klipas tuma, but there's no yetzer.
There's no evil inclination. The term yetzer, yetzirah, yetzer tov.
Right,
Yetzer
it's
tov
inclination.
is one of the lowest dimension of our godly soul. So
Right.
it's sort of subsumed in the godly soul. And the yetzirah is a separate entity, and a non-Jew does not have a yetzirah. A yetzirah's function, a yetzirah is an angel whose function is to test us and tempt us that we should overcome and grow closer and closer to God. So therefore, there's no concept of a yetzirah, of an evil inclination by a non-Jew. They're not a Jew. They don't have a godly soul. There's no mileage. There's no gain. There's no point. So therefore, there's no evil inclination. Now, just to throw in the puzzle one more thing, a true convert, we are told every convert except Ruth. Ruth is the ultimate convert of all converts. So therefore, some say this wasn't true by Ruth, but every other convert that ever was is born like a regular non-Jew, no godly soul, no evil inclination, animal soul of a non-Jew, and with a spark of God compelling them to convert. Because conversion is completely irrational. It makes zero sense. And why in the world would anyone convert? Because of that spark. And that's why the Talmud says, Ger shemisgayer, a convert who converts. Well, that's not a logical sentence. A convert doesn't convert. A non-Jew converts. It should say non-Jew who converts, not convert who converts. Why does it say convert who converts? Because before they convert, the potential convert is already not like a regular non-Jew. They have that spark compelling them to do this most irrational thing. And if you have any friends who converted or in the process, you hear it. You know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. Spark compelling them to convert. When they emerge from the mikvah, besides losing their non-Jewish animal soul, they also lose that spark. They don't get to keep it. The spark is gone. The non-Jewish animal soul is gone. And instead, they're like every one of us. Godly soul, animal soul of a non-Jew, and evil inclination. Gina.
It's really interesting that you're saying that Hashem gives them the spark, because I just noticed with people that I know that have converted, they all have in common. They had this like aha moment where they saw they felt like they were missing something, and they saw tefillin or some sort of thing, and they were just like, yes, that's what I need to be. And it's so irrational because it's such an intense process seemingly, and it to go through all that, but it's like this other pull that they just keep going through it and they want this so badly. So it's really interesting. And I wanted to ask, why, do we know why Hashem gives some people this spark, not others? Do they come from something, or is there a reason Hashem wants them to have this pull?
That's an interesting question. So it says that every convert, if you've ever come up in shul or the ksuba, every convert we say is the child of Abraham and Sarah, legally. Whatever their name is, let's say their name is Ruth bas Abraham, Ruth bas Sarah. Every convert we say, we attribute their parents as Abraham and Sarah. Kabbalistically, we're told Abraham and Sarah were married for many, many, many years. Yitzchak came along after many, many, many years of marriage, which means there was many times of intimacy between Abraham and Sarah, but no child was produced. But we're told no, every act produced a child. produce the soul of a convert. So every single convert is someone who is able to absorb, to acquire, to possess that soul that Avram and Sarah fashioned by their relationship. So that's the connection between that convert and their parents, Avram and Sarah. So to be such a person, yes, there must be some merit, something in line. Not always can we see it. Like conversely, I'll give you the other interesting way Avram and Sarah impacted all the nations of the world. It says when Sarah, after Yitzchak was born, and they had the party, and it says that Hashem, again, deliberate design, set the stage that all these noble women came to the party with their babies and they all forgot the nursemaids. And the babies all get hungry. And Sarah says, oh, I'm nursing my child. I can nurse. And again, the reason given is because people were making fun and saying, you think at this age you had a child? So she showed them. She was nursing. It was her kid. Kabbalistically, we're told, no, it's a lot deeper than that. Now that Yitzchak entered the world, the energy of the world changed, and Sarah's milk was given to children in the world, to non-Jewish children. Every one of those non-Jewish children, they or their descendants are who we call Hasidim Olam, or as we would say today, Noachites. So every Noachite, every non-Jew who is voluntarily keeping God's laws for the nations of the world, the 7 laws of Noah, they're all descendants of those babies nursed by Sarah's milk. So for them, we can say, yes, it is actually literally a biological connection. For the converts, it could be something, a merit, a this, or that, something their parents did, but there's some connection there that they can be this person who is having this soul and fulfilling God's will of the convert. Why does God want converts? Well, there's many reasons. I'll just give you one, and then we will close on this because we are really late. Everyone's being so patient. We're told that the Jews were exiled. It says in the Talmud that the only reason we're exiled among the nations is for converts. And we're like, well, that's really weird because we don't even want converts. We discourage conversion. And for that, we went to exile. What it means is every nation has its spark, has its spiritual power. But all these nations, all these non-Jewish nations are generally evil, and that power is just trapped and only being used to fuel evil. So therefore, every nation has its converts, has those people produced by that nation, from that nation, that can free the energy of that nation and give it to God. And that's why many very holy Jews were converts, because they have a lot of power that they are now turning around and using to serve God. Like, for example, Ovadia. Ovadia was a convert. He was a convert of Rome. And that's why we're told the prophecy of Ovadia is about the destruction of Rome, because he gave God that spark. From him could come the destruction, because he comes from that place. We will stop at this point because this conversation could go on for a long time. You definitely feel free to write down your questions. We could start with them next time as we're continuing what we're really supposed to be doing here, which is the story of Ruth. If any of you have any different things you wanted to learn, and again, today was sort of discussing this one idea, so you might not have, but if you have any other things you want for us to focus on as we do this semi-textual learning, please let me know. Have a wonderful week as we all move from Pesach and march toward Shavuos. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Mrs. Stern.
Yeah.